Before you embark on your learning journey, it's a good idea to learn how you can navigate through the course interface and make the best use of the available features. When you access a module, you'll first view the landing page, which displays its title and the content structure. You can begin the module by clicking the Start Module button. This takes you to the first lesson. You can also view the content structure for each module in the left panel. Each module is divided into sections, and each section consists of lessons. You can also navigate to any lesson by clicking the lesson title in the menu. Note that you can go through the lessons in any order, and you can revisit them at any point. Keep in mind that to complete a lesson, you must scroll all the way down until you see the button that indicates the title of the next lesson. You can check your progress of the module at 2 levels. If you're looking for a specific topic, you can use the search feature. Videos are played using a custom smart player, which provides several features. The Captions button enables you to switch off or display the captions in one of the available languages. You can also customize the way captions are displayed by clicking on the caption settings. From here, you can increase or decrease the font size of the captions and even choose between different colors and transparency levels for the caption's text and background. If you prefer a faster or slower playback speed, you can change it in player settings. To navigate to other modules in the course, you click the Previous or Next buttons. You can also click the View Full Path button to view all of the modules available in the course. To complete a course, you must complete all of the modules that are marked Required. You're now ready to expand your learning horizons at UiPath Academy. Happy learning!
Hello and welcome to the Try Catch, Throw and Rethrow Activities demo. The Try Catch activity catches a specified exception type generated by an activity, and it takes action when the exception has been caught. As a first step, we'll drag and drop a Try Catch activity, which contains 3 blocks: Try, Catches, and Finally. Within the Try section, you should have the activities that have a chance of throwing an exception. The Catches section is the place where you need to select an exception that you want to catch, and even browser for an exception. And the third section is called Finally, and is the block that is always executed, not being dependent on whether an exception is being caught or not. Let's see how this works in action. In terms of interface, we'll use the UI demo application, and we'll use an input Excel file in order to get the data, which has already got some populated fields, and input it into the cache-in and on-us check fields. We'll first go through the workflow step by step. The first activity will be Read Input Data. Then we'll invoke a component that will log into the UI demo application. And after that, we'll loop through the rows of our data table, type in the values, and click the Accept button. As the Excel file is open, the workflow will throw an error. But let's run it to see if that's the case. And here it is. The error displays a message that specifies why the workflow couldn't have been executed. As we can see the exception type within the message, we'll try handling it. In order to do so, we'll click on the activity and surround it with the Try Catch activity. In order to surround the activity in a Try Catch block, you could also use the Ctrl+T hotkey. Within the Catches block, we'll select the type of exception which we want to handle. The most generic type of exception is the system.exception one, which includes all the other ones as you can add multiple catch branches. Keep in mind that the one which will be selected is the most specific. If we have multiple exception types handled in here, and we catch an exception that is more specific than this one, that catch block will be executed before the other ones. In our case, we'll select the IO exception type, the one thrown by our activity. Under catches, we'll add a log activity, have its level set to warn in order to handle the error, which will log information about the exception itself. If we leave the catch sequence empty, the workflow will continue and, at some point, it will break without giving enough information about what happened, and therefore, it's not a good practice to have empty catch blocks. We'll log a warning message with details about the exception, and, in order to get the details of the exception, use the exception.message method and the exception.source. Next, we'll add a close application activity, which will indicate on our Excel file. And in the finally block, we'll add an if statement, having the condition, if our data table is nothing, then read input data activity by copying from the try block. And let's run the workflow. And it works just fine. By inputting data into the UI demo application and by displaying data about what happened after running the workflow under the Output tab. We'll use this error message in order to demonstrate the use of throw activity. This activity is used when we want to throw an exception, even if it's not generated by an activity. So, let's say that there's a business case and we're not allowed to add values greater than 100 within the UI demo application. If there are values greater than 100, we need to throw an exception. Else, type values in the UI demo. If we throw an exception, the execution will be stopped. In this case, we could move the code inside the else statement after the if activity. Running this workflow, the robot will only input the first row of values and then throw an error while reaching the second row. Rethrow activities can be used only inside catch blocks and will throw again the exception that has been initially caught. Now this is very useful for scenarios where you want to catch the exception for logging purposes, but you cannot recover. In this case, you can simply log a message, rethrow the error, and catch this error in a parent workflow. And this concludes our lesson on the try-catch activity. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome to the Retry Scope demo. Within this video, we'll go through a specific situation on how the Retry Scope activity is being used. The Retry Scope activity is generally used for catching and handling errors, which makes it really similar to the try-catch activity. As a particularity, the Retry Scope retries the contained activities as long as the condition is not met or an error is thrown. The Retry Scope activity has the following options: number of retries and retry interval. Number of retries specifies the maximum number of times that the contained actions will be executed until an exception is thrown if the condition has not been met. The retry interval specifies the interval of time for which the retry will be executed. We will first have a look over the component created, which downloads a report from Acme System 1. Within the interface, the robot will have to fill in the vendor tax ID, the month, and the year, and then hit the Download Report button. In order to do so, let's see the activities used within the workflow. We can see that the robot attaches Acme 1, then it has a Type Into activity for the vendor ID, and a Select item for the report month, as well as another one for the report year. Next, we have added a Click activity in order to select the Download Report, a Click drop-down, and another Click activity to Save As. Finally, we've added a Type Into activity in order to save as in the current projects folder, and a Click activity in order to save it. Now, let's run the workflow. We can see that the robot fills in all the details and downloads the report, but fails to save it. In order to easily fix the error, we'll have to add the Retry Scope activity and move the Click on drop-down inside the Retry Scope. And then add an element exist condition and indicate Save As within the browser. Keep in mind that the retry scope specifies the number of retries for a certain action or a block of actions, and the interval when the retry will occur. In this case, we'll have a number of 3 retries and the retry interval set to 5 seconds. Let's now close the pop-up window from the browser and run the workflow again. And it worked just fine, and the report has been successfully downloaded. In order to sum it all up, we have to remember that the retry scope can be used in 2 different ways. Either to add a condition in the condition block so that the actions in the action block will be retried as many times as mentioned in the number of retries field until the condition is met. Or, if the condition is not present, it will retry the actions in the action block until the number of retries is met, or the actions will not throw any errors. And that was all for today. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome to the UiPath Global Exception Handler demo. Today, we will set up an exception handler, and then we'll see how it works by creating a faulty workflow and using this functionality to tackle the error. First things first, what is the Global Exception Handler? Well, it's a type of workflow whose role is to determine the behavior of an automation project in case an error occurs. Now, there are a few things we need to take into consideration when it comes to this functionality. A single exception handler can be added to each workflow. If we try to use it in a library, it won't work as it's only available for processes. To see how the global handler works, let's see an example. We'll automate Notepad by performing a simple action such as sending a hotkey. Let's look for the activity in the Activities panel, and here it is. We'll go with Ctrl+C, and now select the editable area in Notepad. It's time to run the workflow, but first we close the Notepad application. Now, as you can see, nothing is happening on the screen because the application is not open. The execution of such a workflow normally takes around 30 seconds. As you might have already guessed, we'll get an error message. There we go. The selector was not found. This is the type of situation in which the global exception handler is really useful. We have 2 options. The first one is to create a new global handler by clicking here. However, sequence workflows can also fulfill the role of exception handlers, as we're about to see. Let's call this one Handler. If we open the Projects tab now, we can find the handler right here. When we right-click it, we can see that there is the option of setting it as a global handler. That was only a demonstration. We won't use this option now, so we can delete this sequence. Let's go with the first option and create a new global handler. As you can see, there is a predefined structure that consists of two sections. The first one logs the error, and the second one determines what happens next. In this particular case, we won't be using the choose next behavior part because we will customize this workflow. So we can simply remove it. Moving on, we need to create two additional variables. So let's open the variables panel. The purpose of the first one is to count how many times the workflow execution was attempted. So we can call it retry counter. Its type should be int32 because it will store a number. We will use the second variable to store the name of the activity that fails. So let's name it failed activity. We didn't set any value for the two variables, so let's do that now using two assign activities. The first one is for retry count. In the value field, we use the error info argument, which is included by default in global handler workflows and stores information about the faulty workflow and the thrown error. Next, we apply the retry count method to record how many times the robot tries to re-execute the workflow. With the second assign activity, we set the value of failed activity to the errorinfo.activityinfo.name expression, which retrieves the exact source of the error. Finally, let's use an if condition to set the maximum number of execution attempts to 3. We also need a couple more assign activities. In the first one, we set up the result corresponding to the first 3 attempts. We want to retry the execution, so the value is erroraction.retry. We don't want the robot to move on to the 4th attempt. Instead, the execution should be aborted. To achieve that, we proceed by changing the value of the result variable to erroraction.abort. Let's now return to our main workflow. It took a long time for the error message to pop up on the screen the last time we started the execution. Luckily, we can shorten that amount of time by adjusting the timeout property. As we mentioned before, the default value is of 30 seconds, but let's change that to 5 seconds. Okay, it's time to run the workflow. There will be 3 execution attempts. The robot is running right now in the background, but we'll take a look at the output panel afterwards to see more details. In the end, the execution will be aborted and the robot will stop. Here's the error message. As you can see, the workflow was aborted by the user due to an error. If we expand the details section, we can see exactly why that happened. There's another way of identifying the source of the error, running the workflow in debug mode. To do that, open the execution tab and click Debug. The output panel displays what's happening in real time. Here's an error message again, but this time there are more options. If we select Break, the execution is paused. If we click Retry, the current activity is executed one more time. The Ignore option causes the robot to execute the next activity, but there is only a single one in our workflow, so this one is not useful in our particular case. Finally, if we select Continue, the exception handler we have just created will be performed. Let's click Continue. If we look at the output panel, we can see the error again. Now, the maximum number of attempts was 3, so we need to do this 2 more times. And here's the runtime execution error again. Alright, that was all for today. In this demo, we created a global handler and used it in a simple workflow that returned a selector error. Thank you for watching.